As I've mentioned before, Ruby is an object-oriented programming language. What that means in practice is that Ruby programs often involve manipulating objects. And objects are essentially data with operations called functions attached to them. When they're attached to objects, those functions are also called methods. We'll have lots of opportunities to cover these same ideas in a bunch of different contexts. I don't think anyone ever really understood objects or object-oriented programming by reading or hearing a definition. So let's look at some concrete examples. In this section, we're going to look at an attribute for strings. So an attribute is essentially a piece of data associated with an object. Here we are in IRB. I'm going to type in the word badger. And now I'm going to ask Badger what its length is. This is a string. It has a length. Badger.length is 6. This same dot notation is used to access attributes and also methods in a large variety of languages, including JavaScript, Python, and Ruby. One of the most common things to do with a length attribute is comparisons. So let's take a look at some of the ways of comparing two numbers in Ruby. Here we have badger.length, and we can ask Ruby, is this greater than 3? And it is. That's true. So this is a special return value. We can also ask if this length is greater than 6. Well, it's equal to 6, but it's not greater than 6, so this is false. These comparisons are returning true and false values, which are also called boolean values in the context of computer programming, after the mathematician and logician George Boole. This is greater than. We can also say, is the length greater than or equal to 6? That's true. Is it less than 10? Should be true. And we can also ask if it's equal to 6. You might think this, if you haven't done programming much before. That doesn't work, though. The equal sign in most languages nowadays is used for assignment, as we saw when we assign values to variables like Michael to first name and Hartle to last name. The way to do comparison in Ruby is double equals. Now, if you studied JavaScript, you may recall that it's actually a better idea to use triple equals to compare two things in JavaScript. Even though JavaScript does support double equals, it'll give you strange kinds of equalities. Things that aren't really the same will still double equals each other. Ruby actually does support a triple equals as well. But double equals in Ruby doesn't have the same pitfalls it has in JavaScript. And it's fairly rare that you'll need to use triple equals. If you ever have a situation where you call double equals and it returns false when you think it should be true or vice versa, Google around for Ruby equality. There are several subtly different ways to determine equality in Ruby, but almost always double equals will work just fine. One of the things that booleans are especially good for is their use in control flow. This is where you do one thing if a particular boolean condition is true, and maybe you'll do something else if that condition is false. So for example, let's set a password. It's a little bit too short. Not a very secure password here. Suppose we want to return a message that says the password is too short if this password is less than 6 in length. In that case, we could do this. If password.length less than 6. And now I'm not going to put this. I'm just going to return the value. And now we come to one of the most important keywords in all of Ruby. This is a special word. It's what ends blocks of code. It's the word end. It's equivalent to a closed curly brace in a language like JavaScript. So in languages that have a C-like syntax that includes C itself, JavaScript, Perl, PHP, we would have had an opening curly brace right here, and then a closing curly brace here. In Ruby, the new line is equivalent to the opening curly brace, and then ends the block of code. Because this conditional here, this little Boolean test is true, the password length is less than 6, we get this return value. We saw in the last section that parentheses are optional in Ruby function calls. They're also optional here. And indeed, it's probably more conventional to leave them off. You might also have noted that I indented here. This is just to set this part of the code off from the if statement. You can see the text for some more details on Ruby formatting. This use of 2 spaces for indentation is actually less than used to be conventional many years ago, but I think it's really caught on, especially in Ruby. We'll see lots more examples of code formatting, but since this is the first time we've seen it, I wanted to bring your attention to it. As with lots of other languages, Ruby supports else along with if, so we can say if password.length less than 6, password is too short, else password is long enough, and so we can reassign password. Now it's not less than 6, now it's equal to 6. So if we go up arrow, we should get the second part, also known as the second branch. So this is the first branch, and the second branch, password is long enough. Finally, Ruby supports an unusual keyword. Very few languages have this. It's called elsif, spelled E-L-S-I-F. I don't know if I've ever seen it in any other language other than Ruby. Let's say the password is Goldilocks if password.length is less than 6. Password is too short. Else if it's less than 50, we're going to say that it's just right. Else, if it's greater than 50 is what's left. Password is too long. And so now there are 3 branches. Because Goldilocks is greater than or equal to 6, but less than 50, it's just right. Finally, it's worth noting that Ruby lets you put particularly simple control flow into a single line, like this. We can say in just one line, password is too short if password.length is less than 6. We can also invert this. We can say password is too short unless password.length is greater than or equal to 6. This sort of construction isn't very common in other programming languages, but it's fairly common to see in real-life Ruby programming. These Boolean values can be combined using a bunch of different operators, the 2 most common of which are and or. We'll take a look at and first. Let's think about how we combine truth values in ordinary English. If I said, I want French fries and a baked potato, that means I want both. If someone said, hey, do you want French fries and a baked potato, and I didn't want a baked potato, the combination would be false because I didn't want both. Similarly, if I wanted a baked potato but not French fries. The only time that the combination is false is if I don't want either. In logic, looking at these sorts of possibilities is known as a truth table. It's usually written in abstract form, but here we can actually calculate the truth table using IRB. And the way to represent and in Ruby, as it is in many other languages, is double ampersand. So if I want French fries and I don't want a baked potato, that means I don't want the combination. So this is false. Do I want both? No, I don't. What about if I want no French fries, but I do want a baked potato? Do I want both? Do I want French fries and a baked potato? No, false, I do not. If I want neither, it's also false. The only time I want both, the only time the combination is true, is if both are true. We can use this in a conditional as follows. Let's set x equal to foo, the string, and y equal to the empty string. And let's say we want a conditional that has two different behaviors depending on whether the length of both of these strings is 0. So if x.length double equals 0 and y.length double equals 0, in this case that means that both strings are empty. Else, at least one of the strings is non-empty. And in this case, y.length, because y is empty, is 0, so we should get the second branch. There we go. That covers the case of and. Now let's look at or, represented by two vertical bars. Again, we'll use this concrete case of French fries or a baked potato. Now, suppose that I were to say I want French fries, but I don't want a baked potato. Do I want French fries or a baked potato? I do, because I want one of them. So true or false is true. Similarly, if I don't want French fries, but I do want a baked potato, I do want French fries or a baked potato. False or true. If I do want French fries and I do want a baked potato, do I want French fries or a baked potato? Well, this is a slight difference from normal usage. If you were to say to your server in a restaurant, oh, I want French fries or a baked potato, implying that it doesn't really matter which one, just bring me whichever one you want, you might be surprised if they brought you both. But not in programming. In programming, true or true is true. In this case, the colloquial usage actually corresponds to a different logic operation known as exclusive or XOR. Finally, if I want neither French fries nor baked potato, false or false, I definitely don't want the combination if I want neither of them. Going back to our conditional example, we can say if x.length double equals 0 or y.length double equals 0, well, in this case, one of the strings is empty. At least one of the strings is empty. Else, neither of the strings is empty. Remember, though, that y.length is 0, so this should be true here, this combination, which means we'll get this branch, like that. Finally, let's talk about negation. As with a lot of other languages, including Python, JavaScript, and many others, Ruby uses the exclamation point, usually pronounced bang in this context, to negate things. So bang true is false, and bang false is true. So for example, we could do something like this. Recall that x.length is 3, so it's not 0 in particular. So I could say if bang x.length, here we do actually need the parentheses. If bang x.length double equals 0, x is not empty, else x is empty. So this is true if x has length 0, but x doesn't have length 0, so this is false, but then bang negates that. So if this whole thing is true, that means that x is not empty. That's right, but it's kind of confusing, isn't it? False. You would never actually write it this way, What you really want to do is use the bang here before this first equal sign. So the way you want to do this in real life is like this. It's much easier to understand. If x.length not equals 0 or bang equals 0, then the same thing. Same result, but much clearer code. Finally, it's worth noting that every object in Ruby has some truth value in a Boolean context. And there's a simple way to ask Ruby to give you the value of an object in a Boolean context, which is to call bang twice. So bang true, remember, is false. But that means if we call bang bang, it'll give us true. Bang true is false, but then we say bang false, that gives us back true. And similarly, which means that we can do something like this. Bang bang a string. That's true. So this gives us a way to ask Ruby, hey, what's the Boolean value of this thing? What do you suppose this is? Bang bang empty string. In a lot of languages, this is false, but not in Ruby. It's actually true. In fact, even the number 0 is true in Ruby. It turns out that everything is true in Ruby except for false and one other thing, nil. As a result of this, it's very unusual to use just raw objects in Ruby comparisons. You'll almost always use some sort of explicit comparison or a Boolean method. That is, a function attached to an object that returns a Boolean value, a few of which we'll see in the next section.